He had it all. Power beyond measure, a kingdom at peace, wealth that turned silver into something worthless, wisdom unmatched in the history of kings, and women, hundreds of them, from every corner of the known world. But tonight, he sits alone. The golden goblet in his hand trembles slightly as he lifts it to his lips. Outside the palace walls, the wind carries the faint laughter of young wives whose names he no longer remembers. The air smells of foreign perfume and burned incense, drifting from altars he once swore he'd never build. Before him lies a small scroll, Ecclesiastes, open to the very words he once wrote in a moment of anguish. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. He leans back against the cold stone of his throne, stares into the flickering oil lamp, and exhales. This is Solomon, the wisest king in the Bible, the man who had everything except peace in his own heart. Before we begin this journey, let me take a moment to speak to you. Thank you for choosing to watch this video. In doing so, you've made a quiet but powerful decision to open your heart to something sacred. This isn't just history. This is divine wisdom, passed down through scripture, preserved for thousands of years, and now shared with you. If this story touches something in you, if you're searching for deeper understanding, for spiritual clarity, or for timeless truths, then you're in the right place. This is Sacred Wisdom, a channel dedicated to stories from the Bible that don't just inform, they transform. We explore the triumphs, the tragedies, and the intimate moments where God and humanity meet. So please, subscribe and help us grow a community where biblical stories come alive with meaning, depth, and heart. Now, let us return to the night when Solomon, the king who had everything, began to realize what he truly lacked. Solomon's story began in the shadow of shame. His father, King David, was a man after God's heart, but not without great failure. One evening, David saw Bathsheba bathing. She was married, yet he sent for her. The affair led to pregnancy, deception, and ultimately the arranged death of her husband Uriah, a loyal soldier. Their first child died shortly after birth, a silent but devastating judgment from God. The palace, once echoing with music, fell into a hush of mourning. From that silence, a second son was born, Solomon. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went to her and made love to her. She gave birth to a son, and they named him Solomon. The Lord loved him. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 24. The child's name meant peace, and peace was exactly what David longed for. But God gave the boy another name through the prophet Nathan, Jedediah, which means beloved of the Lord. That name was never used publicly. It was a secret between God and the child, a sacred promise whispered into his destiny. Nathan became Solomon's spiritual mentor. He taught him the ways of the Torah, the heart of justice, the weight of leadership. But more than knowledge, Nathan taught him the story behind his story. Solomon knew from a young age he was only alive because God forgives. He wasn't born into a clean legacy, but into grace. And grace carried responsibility. In those early years, David was often away, dealing with war, betrayal, and bloodshed. So Solomon spent hours in the quiet chambers of the palace gardens, listening to Nathan speak of God's mercy and majesty. He learned to listen, to ponder, to weigh a word before speaking. That gift would grow into wisdom, but first, it was just silence. David grew old. His other sons, Absalom, Adonijah, fought for power, plotted, rebelled. But Nathan saw something else in Solomon: restraint, discernment, humility. And so Nathan acted. He approached David in his final days and reminded him of God's promise that Solomon would be king. Through whispers, through visions, and through bold counsel, he secured Solomon's path to the throne. "Surely Solomon your son shall be king after me, and he shall sit on my throne in my place." 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 30. Solomon was not the eldest, he was not the strongest, but he was chosen, not by royal tradition, but by divine intention. And when David lay dying, it was Solomon who stood by his bed. The torch was passed not with trumpets, but with trembling hands. The boy, now a young man, carried the weight of a nation and the burden of a fractured legacy. Now, years later, the old king sits by a flickering lamp. He runs his finger along the edge of his golden goblet and stares at the moonlight seeping through his palace window. He remembers Nathan. He remembers that name, Jedediah. No one calls him that anymore. He wonders if he still is the beloved of the Lord. I was born because God forgave. I was raised because He had hope in me, but somewhere along the way, I started living like I earned it all. From the ashes of David's past, Solomon rose, young, uncertain, yet chosen. And one night, that divine choice would be sealed in a dream that would change everything. The night was quiet, unusually so. No war drums, no royal banquets, just stillness. The kind that makes a man feel small before something greater. Solomon had just been crowned king, yet the weight of the crown pressed heavier than he expected. He was young, some say only in his late teens. The throne room still smelled of incense from his father's final blessings. The sandals of his enemies had barely cooled as he ascended, and now the kingdom was his. That night, as he lay alone, sleep came like a breath from heaven, and in that sleep, God came. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5. Solomon could have asked for anything, power, wealth, vengeance, but none of those things crossed his lips. Standing in the presence of the Almighty, even in a dream, he felt the truth of his youth, his limitations, and so he said, "Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong, for who is able to govern this great people of yours?" 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 9. There was silence, then warmth, unmistakable. God was pleased, not just by the request, but by the posture of the heart. Solomon had asked for wisdom not to glorify himself, but to serve his people rightly. Since you have asked for this and not for long life or wealth, I will give you a wise and discerning heart. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor. 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 11 to 13. When Solomon awoke, he knew the world had changed, not outside, but within. The clarity, the calm. It wasn't a feeling, it was a gift. He began to see through people, through stories, through intentions. Judgment, once cloudy, now felt almost instinctive. The boy had become king in title, but now he had become king in spirit. Now, in the silence of his old age, the same Solomon sits under moonlight. He remembers that night, not with joy, but with ache. He remembers how easy it was to hear God back then, how clear the path once looked. Now, there are no dreams, no divine voices. Back then, I asked for wisdom to serve. Now I use it to justify the things I once feared. Back then, his voice came like a wind in my sleep. Now, the wind just howls through stone halls, and I mistake it for silence. The gold he once didn't ask for now spills from his treasury like sand. The honor he never pursued now traps him in rooms filled with shallow praise. The wisdom that once made the world seek him has become a mirror reflecting all the compromises he chose to ignore. And yet he cannot blame God, because God gave him exactly what he asked for. I was wise once, but wisdom, when untethered from obedience, is just vanity with eloquence. God gave Solomon wisdom, and the world would soon see it. His first test came not on a battlefield, but in a courtroom. with a crying child and two desperate mothers. It began with a sword. Two women stood before the young king, both claiming to be the mother of the same child. No witnesses, no clear evidence, just pain. One clutched the baby to her chest, the other pointed with trembling hands. The throne room held its breath. Solomon, newly crowned but already wise beyond his years, looked at them both. Then he called for a sword. Cut the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other. 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 25. One woman cried out, "Please, my lord, give her the child, do not kill him." The other said, "He shall be neither mine nor yours, cut him in two." Solomon raised his hand. "Give the baby to the first woman, do not kill him, she is the mother." 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 27. From that moment on, the land buzzed with awe, not just at the decision, but at the insight. He didn't need evidence. He read the soul. And Israel realized this king saw what others could not. His wisdom wasn't from books, it was from heaven. The story spread beyond the borders. From the east and the west, kings sent gifts. Trade routes opened. Tribute flowed into Jerusalem like rivers. Solomon's court became a place of pilgrimage. For merchants, rulers, scribes, and seekers of truth, he sat not only on a throne of stone, but on a foundation of understanding. Then came the temple. Years earlier, his father David had dreamed of building a house for the Lord, but God had told him no. That honor would go to Solomon. And so, Solomon built. With cedar from Lebanon, gold from Ophir, and stones cut in silence, no hammer was heard on the site. The design was sacred. Solomon built the temple and completed it. 1 Kings chapter 6 verse 14. When the Ark of the Covenant was brought into the most holy place, a cloud filled the temple. Priests could not stand to minister. The glory of the Lord had come, and the people sang, worshiped, rejoiced. For a moment, heaven and earth touched. The glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. 1 Kings chapter 8 verse 11. But perhaps the most famous visitor was the Queen of Sheba. She came not for gold, but for wisdom. She brought questions meant to test, challenge, perhaps even humble this famed king. He answered them all. She said to the king, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true, but I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me." 1 Kings chapter 10 verses 6 to 7. Solomon had become more than a ruler. He was a living legend. Israel had never been greater. Peace, prosperity, influence. His name meant peace, and for a generation, that's exactly what he brought. But now, that same Solomon, old and forgotten, sits beneath pillars he once designed. The same halls where people once lined up for answers now echo with silence. No more questions, no more visitors, just memories. They once called me the son of Israel. Now the light in me has long gone out. His fame spread. His words traveled farther than his armies. But the same doors that welcomed glory soon opened wide for compromise. They came one by one, some in chariots, others on foot, draped in silks, veils, and royal perfumes. Princesses from Egypt, Moabite women with painted eyes, Sidonian daughters bearing gifts and silent customs. Each carried not only a dowry, but a god, foreign, carved, and waiting to be worshipped. Solomon welcomed them all, not for love, but for peace, political peace. Every marriage was a treaty, every kiss a signature, every smile a concession. King Solomon loved many foreign women. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them." 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 1. At first he told himself it was harmless. A shrine here, a statue there. Let them burn incense in the garden. Let them whisper to Ashtoreth under the stars. He still went to the temple, still offered sacrifices to the Lord. He thought he could balance it. control it. But the line between tolerance and devotion began to blur. The palace changed. Walls once echoing with psalms were now lined with carved idols. Priests of Molech walked freely through corridors where Levites once stood. The scent of cedar from the temple faded, replaced by the cloying incense of 100 altars. The harem, once a symbol of prosperity, became a labyrinth of divided loyalties. Followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Molech, the detestable god of the Ammonites. 1 Kings, chapter 11, verse 5. Some wives wept in silence, still holding to the God of Israel. Others smiled as their gods gained ground. And Solomon? He stood in the middle, believing that his wisdom could justify everything. That unity mattered more than holiness. That compromise was the price of peace. So he built them altars, high places, sacred groves, platforms of polished stone where rituals were carried out, rituals he once condemned. He stopped correcting, then stopped caring, then he participated. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 6. No one stopped him. Who would dare? The prophets were silent, the priests were sidelined. Nathan was long gone, and among 1,000 women, not one had the authority to call him back. He was surrounded, yet unreachable, powerful, yet spiritually hollow. Now, in the solitude of his final years, Solomon walks those same palace corridors. The altars still stand, the symbols carved in stone remain. Though moss now grows over their edge, he pauses nearer one, Ashtoreth's statue, faded by time and weather. His eyes scan the face he once bowed before, and shame tugs at the edges of his soul. I built the temple of the Lord with gold and acacia wood, but my heart became an unlit altar, cold, dry, forgotten. He closes his eyes and remembers when he used to kneel in the temple, when the presence of God filled the air like wind before rain. Now, when he kneels, it is not before the Lord, it is before fear, before silence, before consequence. Once I knelt before God out of awe, now I kneel before others out of fear of offending them. The laughter of his wives still echoes in his memories, but the warmth is gone. All he hears now is the sound of 1,000 chains hidden behind golden smiles. What began with love turned into devotion, but not to God. And when Solomon's heart turned, heaven grew quiet. There was a time when the voice of God visited Solomon in dreams, a time when answers came like morning dew, quiet, certain, undeniable. But now, silence, deafening silence. He still offered sacrifices, still went through the motions, but heaven no longer responded. The weight of his choices had closed the line. The temple he built still stood tall, but inside him something sacred had collapsed. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 9. Twice. That detail haunted him. God had come twice, not once, to speak with him. And now, the one who gave him wisdom no longer sent dreams, no longer whispered in the wind. It wasn't sudden, it was slow, like a wick fading, like a song forgotten. The Lord had warned him. But Solomon, intoxicated with his own success, didn't listen. He thought he could manage the tension between truth and compromise, between worship and politics, between reverence and pleasure, until the silence came, and he realized he had crossed a line he couldn't see. Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 11. The words came through a prophecy, no longer in dreams, but in confrontation. And they struck harder than any sword. The kingdom would be torn, not in his lifetime, but in his son's, and that made it worse. His son would suffer because of him. The legacy he built would crumble not with age, but with judgment. He thought of David, his father, who also sinned, but David had repented fully, brokenly, shamelessly. Solomon had not. He had explained, justified, smoothed it over with reasoning. That was the curse of wisdom. It could defend even disobedience. Now the enemies rose. Jeroboam, once a loyal servant, now stirred whispers among the tribes. Edom rebelled. Syria grew bold. Cracks in the kingdom deepened. What was once a nation of glory became a land of murmurs and unrest. The Lord raised up adversaries against Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 14. Solomon watched it all unfold with heavy eyes. He could strategize, yes. He could predict every political move, but he could not command the voice of God to return. And that was the voice he missed most. Not the approval of kings, not the flattery of queens, just his voice. So he wandered the palace at night, barefoot, past stone columns, past altars, past echoes of laughter and betrayal, and he whispered, not to idols, but into the void. Lord, will you speak again, even just once more? No answer. He sat in his chamber, listening to the wind sliding through the arches. It made the sound of breath, but it was not breath, just stone and air and absence. Once you came to me in dreams. Now I only dream of hearing you again. His enemies grew bolder. His advisors grew colder, and his soul, it grew smaller. Wisdom without intimacy had become noise. Silence without repentance had become judgment. I spoke with eloquence in the courts of kings, but lost the language of prayer. In the end, it wasn't a loud fall. It was a slow fading. Solomon didn't break overnight. He drifted, and never realized how far he'd gone until God stopped answering. With no voice from above, he turned inward, and in the stillness of regret, he began to write, not for a nation, but for his own soul. He didn't write it for an audience. He wrote it because there was no one left to talk to. The scribes thought it was philosophy, the priests perhaps a sermon, but Ecclesiastes was neither. It was confession, a king's journal, a soul peeling back the gold leaf to show the rot beneath. Alone in his chamber with a flickering oil lamp and too many regrets, Solomon began to write, not with pride, but with grief. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 14. He had tasted it all, pleasure, power, beauty, intellect. He built houses, vineyards, gardens, and reservoirs. He gathered singers and concubines. He studied the stars, ruled over nations, and surpassed every king before him in glory. And yet, none of it stayed. None of it satisfied. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, everything was meaningless. Ecclesiastes chapter 2 verses 10 to 11. He spoke to himself as if through a mirror. No titles, no robes. Just a man who had run the race, climbed the ladder, and found the top unbearably empty. The words were not bitter, but bare. There was no point pretending anymore, not to God, not to himself. He thought of the laughter from his younger days, the cheers in the throne room, the Queen of Sheba's wonder. Now, all of it felt like echoes in a cavern, achievements recorded on tablets, but forgotten in hearts. The more knowledge, the more grief. The more wisdom, the more sorrow. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 18. He had spent a lifetime gathering things that passed away. But in writing, he began to see again, not with the eyes of a king, but with the eyes of a child, a servant, a man who once knelt before God not out of guilt, but out of wonder. Slowly, the pages turned from sorrow to surrender. He no longer tried to control meaning. He just named what mattered. Fear God and keep His commandments. for this is the whole duty of man. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. That line came last, after the poetry, after the questions, after the aching honesty. He ended with the only thing that had ever truly mattered, not riches, not legacy, not even wisdom, just obedience. Now the aged king sits beside that same scroll. The ink has faded slightly, but the words remain. He touches the edge with his fingers, not to edit, but to remember. I once believed I could understand all things. Now I know the deepest truths come not from understanding, but from surrender. The scribes will preserve his words, future kings will quote him, but only Solomon knows what it cost to write those verses. It cost him his throne, his peace, his intimacy with God. But not all was lost, because in the end, he remembered. I built everything under the sun, but the only thing that matters is what lies above it. And when the writing was done, so was the journey. The man who had once spoken for God now waited quietly to meet him. No trumpets sounded, no choirs sang. The king simply slept. One evening, as the breeze rustled the silk curtains and the palace lay in hush, Solomon sat beneath the low glow of an oil lamp. His fingers rested on the scroll he had written, Ecclesiastes, now worn at the edges like the hands that held it. He didn't call for a final feast, didn't summon the wives, didn't order a monument. He whispered the last verse once more, not aloud, but to his own soul. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. Then he leaned back, eyes drifting toward the heavens, the same skies under which he once knelt in glory, and later in silence. Some say he smiled. Some say a tear slipped down his cheek. All agree he passed quietly, as if returning home. Outside, the torches flickered in the courtyard. The night deepened. The kingdom slept, unaware that the man who once ruled the world had left it. But in his absence, he left something greater than palaces or treasures. He left a book. He left repentance. He left a warning wrapped in wisdom. I had everything, he might have said, but only one thing mattered. If you've made it to this point, thank you, not just for clicking on this video, but for staying until the end. That means this story spoke to something deep in you. Something beyond history or kings or palaces. Solomon's life wasn't just a tale of wisdom and power. It was a mirror held up to our own hearts. He had everything the world could offer. But in the end, he reminded us that only one thing truly matters. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's the legacy, not the temple, not the throne, but the return of a soul to its creator. If this story stirred something in you, hope, humility, reflection, then you're exactly where you need to be. Here at Sacred Wisdom, we don't just tell Bible stories. We explore the inner journey, the fragile choices, and the sacred truths that still speak today. So please, subscribe to our channel. It costs nothing, but it means everything to us. Help us share more stories that awaken the soul, that echo across time, and that whisper truth into the noise of the modern world. Again, thank you for watching, and remember, wisdom is not in what we know, but in who we return to. See you in the next story.